We're going to take a look at an overview of the nervous system and also the cells of the nervous system in this lecture. The nervous system is divided into two parts. We have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is everything that's outside of the brain and spinal cord. So this includes the afferent division or sensory nervous system. So this is going to be bringing all of the sensory information into the spinal cord and the brain. And the efferent division, which is all of the motor information, which is going to be going out to the muscles and the glands from the brain and spinal cord. The motor or efferent division is divided into two divisions. We have the somatic nervous system, which is going to innervate the skeletal muscle. This is mostly voluntary control. And then the autonomic nervous system, which is going to innervate the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and the glands. And this is mostly under involuntary control. And we divide the autonomic nervous system into two parts. We have the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. This is just a nice picture of the nervous system, showing the central nervous system on the left with the brain and spinal cord, and then we have the peripheral nervous system over on the right. So remember, the peripheral nervous system is divided into the afferent or sensory division. That's going to be bringing in all the sensory information into the brain and spinal cord. The brain and spinal cord is your big integrating center. It's going to decide what we need to do with that sensory information, if we need to respond, get out of the way, or whatever we need to do. And then it will send signals out through the efferent division, the motor division, either through the somatic nervous system to skeletal muscle or through the autonomic nervous system to the cardiac, smooth muscle, and glands, either through sympathetic or parasympathetic nerves to affect those. The cells of the nervous system, there are two types. We have the neurons and glial cells. The neurons are excitable cells, meaning that they're able to produce action potentials or nerve signals. The glial cells are going to support the neurons. The word glial means glue, so they're kind of the glue that holds the nervous system together. There are a number of different types of glial cells, so make sure you know these. In the central nervous system, we have astrocytes. They are star-shaped cells, so that's how they got their name. They will stimulate the formation of the blood-brain barrier. That's what BBB stands for. They also maintain the right concentration of ions in the extracellular fluid around the neurons, and they also will help feed the neurons, so they keep the neurons happy. The microglial cells are a type of white blood cell, so they're there for defense. And then the ependymal cells, they will produce the CSF or cerebral spinal fluid. The oligodendrocytes will make the myelin sheath in the central nervous system. And then the Schwann cells are the only glial cells that are located in the peripheral nervous system. And they will make the myelin sheath out in the peripheral nervous system. Here's a picture of all the glial cells. On the left side, we've got the central nervous system. And then on the right side of the picture, we've got the peripheral nervous system. So in the central nervous system, we have a number of different types of glial cells. You can see the neuron that's in yellow. And then we've got the capillary that's in red. The green cells are the astrocytes. So they're going to reach out their little feet and touch the capillaries that are traveling through the brain, and they're going to stimulate the formation of tight junctions between the epithelial cells making up the walls of the capillaries. And that'll form the blood-brain barrier, and that'll really control what goes in and out of the brain, because the brain has to have a very controlled environment as far as the amount of nutrients and ions that are in there to make sure that the neurons stay happy. So the astrocytes will help stimulate the formation of the blood-brain barrier. And then the astrocytes will also make sure the ion concentrations are just right around the neurons and help feed the neurons. So they really help support them. The small purple cells, these are the microglial cells. Micro just meaning they're small. These are a type of white blood cell. They're there for defense. They're actually phagocytes, so if any infection or any dead cell parts or anything needs to be cleaned up in the central nervous system, they will go around and eat any invaders or any dead cell parts. So that's their job. And then the ependymal cells, they will make the CSF or cerebrospinal fluid. They also have cilia on them that will help circulate the CSF as well. And then these light purple cells, these are the oligodendrocytes. So they're going to form the myelin sheath. Their name, oligo, means few. Dendro means branch. So they're going to send out a few branches and wrap themselves around several axons. And they will form the myelin sheath around the axons of several different neurons. And that'll help speed up the nerve signals as they travel along the axon. And then in the peripheral nervous system, the only glial cell we have there are the Schwann cells, and the Schwann cells will form the myelin sheath there, and they will only wrap around just one part of one axon and form the myelin sheath there. There are several different components of a neuron that are really important to know that we're going to be talking about quite a bit in this chapter. So I'll just draw a neuron here, and I'm not a very good artist, so I apologize, but we'll draw our neuron here. Okay, so we've got a couple of different parts here. The dendrites, dendrite means branch, and this is where we're going to be receiving the incoming signal. So a lot of times you're going to have a synapse here with another neuron, and neurotransmitter will be released here, and that's where you're going to be binding to the neurotransmitter and receive the signal from the previous neuron. So dendrites will receive the incoming signals. The soma, or the cell body, that is where the nucleus is located. Soma just means body, and also where the organelles of the neuron will be located. The axon hillock is just the beginning of the axon. The axon is just the long, skinny area right here. So the axon hillock is just the start of the axon, and the axon hillock is actually where the action potential starts. So that's a really important part of the axon. And then the axon, the action potential will travel along there until it gets to the axon terminal, where the neurotransmitter will be stored. And when the action potential reaches the axon terminal, that'll trigger the release of the axon terminal into the synaptic cleft, and then the neuron will then communicate with the target cell. Sometimes axons will have a branch or a collateral axon, which will then allow the action potentials to go down a different branch of the axon and then communicate with a different target cell as well. And then the synapse is a very important part of the neuron. This is where the neuron is going to communicate with the next target cell. And the synapse can be between two neurons, a neuron and a muscle cell, or a neuron and a gland. And then two really important terms, we have the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron. So let's just take a look at some pictures here. So we have our synapse here that we're referring to, and the neuron that is before the synapse, that's your presynaptic neuron. And the neuron that is after the synapse, that is your postsynaptic neuron. So those are two very important terms to keep track of. And if we had another synapse that we were looking at, maybe we had another neuron down here, maybe we had another one over here, and maybe we were looking at this synapse here, then this cell here would be the presynaptic neuron, and then this one would be the postsynaptic neuron. So you just have to, figure out which synapse you're looking at to say which one's the presynaptic neuron and which one's the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, and this just shows you the synapses can be between two neurons, or it can be between a neuron and a muscle cell, and the muscle could be a skeletal muscle cell, it could be a smooth muscle cell, or a cardiac muscle cell. And then the synapse could also be between a neuron and a gland cell, and the gland could be either an endocrine gland or an exocrine gland. And then there's also three different structural classes of neurons, so there's three different shapes of neurons. We have bipolar neurons over here on the left, and the bipolar neurons, how they got their name is if you look at the cell body in the middle, it looks like there are two poles. So there are one pole and another pole over here, so it looks like there's two poles coming off of the cell body. So that's how they got the name bipolar. So these bipolar neurons are always sensory neurons, and they're only found in some of these special senses. Special senses are the senses that are found on your head. So the special senses where we see bipolar neurons would be in smell, vision, and hearing. We can find bipolar neurons in those areas. These bipolar neurons are not very common in the body. These are the rarest of the neurons that we have in the body. The next structural class of neuron we have are pseudo-unipolar, and that's because it looks like there is just one pole, okay, one thing coming off the cell body here. These pseudo-unipolar neurons, these are all the rest of the sensory neurons. Okay, so one's for touch, all the other special senses, proprioception, knowing where your joints are, your limbs, those are all going to be pseudo-unipolar neurons. And then the multipolar neurons, if you look at the cell body, you can see that there are multiple poles, multiple things coming off the cell body, and so that's how they got the name multipolar neurons. So these multipolar neurons, these will either be what are called interneurons, which are found in the central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord, or they're going to be motor neurons out in the peripheral nervous system. And then the other way we can classify neurons, we have three functional classes of neurons. So we have afferent neurons, which are sensory neurons, and they're going to be bringing in the sensory information towards the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. The interneurons, inter meaning between, these are the neurons that are in between the afferent and the efferent neurons. The efferent neurons are motor neurons that are going to be innervating the muscles and the glands, and they're going to be doing whatever you need to do to get away from whatever is chasing you or change your behavior or whatever's going on that you need to change and respond to a change in the environment. As far as which one of these is more common in the body, we have way more interneurons than afferent or efferent neurons, and that's because we have billions of neurons that are in the central nervous system. So most of our neurons in our body are going to be interneurons. And then just to mention the myelin-forming cells, these glial cells, we have the oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system and the Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. The purpose of having a myelin sheath is it's going to speed up the transmission of the action potentials or the nerve signals down the axon. And we have these gaps in the myelin sheath, and these gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier, so just named after the scientists that describe these. So here's just showing the difference between the oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. So remember that these are going to send out a few branches, and they're going to wrap around several different axons and form the myelin sheath on several different axons. And then you can see these nodes around VA, these little gaps in the myelin sheath. And in the peripheral nervous system, we just have these Ch7 cells. So they're just going to wrap around one section of one axon and form the myelin sheath there. And so this myelin sheath will just speed up the transmission of the nerve signal. So for example, if you have an axon that does not have a myelin sheath, it will transmit the action potential about 2 miles an hour, which is about walking speed. Whereas if you do have a myelin sheath, the transmission speed can be about 270 miles an hour. So it really speeds up that transmission. And this is just a neat picture just showing you how the Ch7 cell in the peripheral nervous system wraps itself around the axon and makes the myelin sheath.